Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. The history of hip-hop is loaded with some of the most compelling individual stories in pop music history. Obviously, the tragic Biggie-Tupac feud of the mid-1990s comes to mind. You have the rise of Eminem as a world-conquering rap hero who transcended race and ethnicity. You also have how mental health issues contributed to the downfall of Lauryn Hill and Kanye West. Most recently, there's been the headline-grabbing feud between Kendrick Lamar and Drake. However, one of the most underrated stories that has been lost to the winds of history, with the exception being in the memories of the most hardcore hip-hop nerds, is the story of Big L. It's the story of how one of the most prodigiously talented rappers and lyricists that New York City ever produced failed to hit it big, and just when it seemed that he was on the precipice of crossing over and having more widespread recognition, he was tragically murdered. It's a story that needs to be told and revisited because when you look back and listen to his rather small catalog, it's startling as to how brilliant the guy really was. He had a sharp, cutting stiletto flow that just rolled off his tongue effortlessly, a style that greatly influenced Jay-Z, especially after Big L slaughtered him in a rap battle on Stretch and Bobbito's legendary New York radio show. His lyrics told stories about life in poor inner cities that were uncompromising in their grittiness and depiction of criminal lifestyles that made one wonder how lived in these songs were. He painted pictures with his words, vivid descriptions of the city, of people's thoughts, motives, actions, and personalities. But more importantly, he didn't glorify nor condemn life on the streets. His artistic sense of detachment was crucial in letting the listener come to their own conclusions. His gift for concise yet powerful descriptive detail rivaled that of mystery noir writers like Raymond Chandler, who used as few words as possible to give the biggest impression and paint the biggest picture possible. In his lifetime, he only put out one studio album and 6 singles. But such is the undeniable power and innovation of his music, especially his overwhelming rapping style and lyricism, that it needs to be discussed, it needs to be shared, and it especially needs to be rediscovered by younger generations of hip-hop fans and artists. So, let's celebrate the all-too-brief career of a true lost genius of hip-hop, someone who in a parallel universe would have taken Jay-Z's spot as king of the hip-hop mountain. Welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
All right, folks, as usual, before we get going with the main appetizer or the main dining course for this episode, let's give you the appetizer by crossing over into the other side of the space-time continuum. Shall we, Arturo?
Yes, we shall. Music that would be good, music that should be more well recognized, and in a parallel universe, better version of this world. This music would be on the radio and everywhere and on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the parallel universe is where rock and roll is still predominant, and we like to visit the parallel universe. It's our bi-weekly visit into a better place, a friendlier world than this world that we live in now, where you can still light those lighters and still rock out those big choruses and still jam the fuck out. Kick the jams out, motherfucker, but that's what we do here in the parallel universe. And that's a fancy way of saying this is the segment of the episode where we review new and newish records by artists we think that you should dig and that you should check out, and that we really like, and we think that you would as well. So, with that said, Arturo, who are you covering in this episode's version of the Parallel Universe?
Yes, hailing from Turkey, but currently based in Tel Aviv, Israel, the band Shatalites, or Shatalites, I prefer to call them Shatalites, S with a little hook in the bottom, just released their second album, Alar, and they're a band that's already garnering some hype, having appeared on Seattle's KEXP radio show, as well as exposure on BBC Radio. Now, how to describe their sound? Context is needed here. In the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s, there was a wave of bands and music coming out of Turkey that blended Western-style rock with Eastern European gypsy music and, more importantly, the alluring, exotic melodies and harmonies that are associated with the Middle East. It makes sense considering that Turkey is the gateway between Europe and Asia. In the 2010s, there was a revival of this kind of music, with many contemporary bands miming this sound, with the most famous, of course, most famous North American example being the Texas band Curmudgeon, using this as one of the various points of reference in their music. Well, what Shatalites do is take this beautiful, sensual style of music and give it a crisp, modern-day 2020s production sheen and sound. Well, at least that's what they did on their self-titled debut album from 2022. For this new and improved version of Shatalites, they infuse their music with a strong dose of good old progressive rock. Anyone who knows me and listens to this podcast knows that I'm not the biggest fan of prog rock. But thankfully, Shatalites don't bore the listener with needlessly complex, indulgent song constructions and show-off instrumentalism. The multiple sections that the songs have make sense. They don't alienate the listener. And the guitar and keyboard solos are actually quite lyrical and even beautiful. I guess you can chalk this up to the pervasive overall Middle Eastern influence, where restraint and taste are paramount. Lead-off single, Yok Yok, is a perfect example of the band's new hybrid style. Aggressive yet sexy. Tight in execution, yet fluid in how it seeps into your ears. Psychedelic yet grounded. Gizli Ajan is a spaced-out instrumental jam with a deftness of touch that alludes to danceability, as if Stereolab decided to venture into the Turkish desert. The danceability is made more explicit in Zuluf Dokulmus Yüze, where the band delves into irresistible Arabian disco mixed with interludes of heavy-ass guitar riffing. It's an enchanting, wonderful record that gets better and reveals more intoxicating textures with each listen. A very enthusiastic 4 out of 5 stars from me. Chris?
Yeah, Turkish space rock, baby. Really, really strong stuff. And like you said, it's a textured record. It's a sensual record. And and like I said, I've listened to it a couple of times, and it's grown on me. It's good call. I hadn't thought in terms of progressive rock because I was caught up in the psychedelia and I was caught up in the Middle Eastern rhythms,
Right.
but it does have kind of a prog rock vibe. And yeah, I did think of Curmudgeon when I listened to this record.
If Curmudgeon rocked more.
Yeah, if Curmudgeon rocked more, yeah, exactly. If they had more, if Curmudgeon was crisper,
Yeah.
and not quite as dopey as they've become, then maybe they'd be Shatalites. So yeah, I think this band's got a future. I could see why they're getting some hype because they're pretty darn original. They're like they're one of these bands that's an original throwback. That they put a spin on something that's been done, but not quite what you've heard in the past. And so, yeah, interesting story. A bunch of Turks that ended up in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And from what I read, there's quite a scene in Tel Aviv of this kind of electronic music right now.
I wouldn't call this electronic. This is a full organic band.
Yeah. What am I trying to say? Dance rock.
Right, yeah.
Progressive instead of electronica, it's more like progressive dance rock.
Progressive dance rock with instruments heavily indebted to Middle Eastern music.
Yeah. and apparently there's a scene for that in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of carving out their own space within that scene. So I'll be curious to see what they come up with in the future. They're a relatively young band, like you said. This is their second album, so more power to them. God bless satellites. Speaking of second records, we're going to do a little bit of a 180, and instead of exotic Turkish dance music and sort of progressive Middle Eastern music, we're doing plain old, good old American emo rock and covering a band that we've covered on this podcast before a few years ago called Anxious. These are a bunch of kids in from Connecticut that do emo very reverently, but also very, very well. They're a surprisingly adept band of rockers and songwriters for young kids. They're all in their early 20s. So let's talk a little bit about Anxious and their new album, Bambi. So a couple years back in our Parallel Universe segment, I covered a young band from Southern Connecticut, Fairfield area, really, named Anxious that I thought was promising and interesting. The band played a straight-up brand of emo punk on their debut album, Little Green House, borrowing from bands like Texas's The Reason and more familiarly, Jimmy Eat World. The band, while somewhat inconsistent, did show some aptitude for writing strong hooks and crafting engaging riffs and screaming pained lyrics and busting out the occasional harmony. My hope was that they'd get better as they matured. Well, here in 2025, that's proving to be the case. Anxious's second record may have a ridiculous title, Bambi, but it's anything but lightweight forest shit. They've grown louder and more muscular, and they've also gotten hookier, adding a flair for doo-doo-doo vocal adornments to their riffage. Their writing has also grown more consistent and engaging. They're not trying to be anything but a promo emo band still, but band leaders Dante Malucci and Grady Allen write surprisingly good songs. They also employ a secret weapon in drummer Johnny Camner, who lays down a damn good brontosaurus beat consistently throughout Bambi. He's a legitimately strong rock drummer worth celebrating. Highlights include the supremely melodic bangers "Tell Me Why" and "Sunder." The first of those I could see being a pop hit in a parallel universe or in like 30. Let's go in the Wayback Machine to 30 years ago. I could see that being a pop hit. The slower, softer, near psychedelic gem "Audrey Go Again," which sounds like something strangely with the Smashing Pumpkins ish. From so kind of Siamese Dream, kind of slow down kind of stuff. The ultra hooky, ultra heavy first single, Counting Sheep. There's the surprisingly sunny, hummable power pop nugget, Some Girls, which sounds like it wouldn't be out of place on Hole's Billy Corgan-driven Celebrity Skin album from 1998. And finally, album closer, I'll Be Around, one of the noisiest but yet probably the most subtly poppy thing on the record. In the bygone era, our Parallel Universe segment celebrates, it's not a stretch to think a couple of these songs could have become radio hits. That makes Bambi a pretty refreshing listen to me, anyway, as more of the, I'm our resident emo fan on this podcast. And so these kids know their way around a good emo tune, and I can only see them growing more confident and self-assured from here. Who knows? Maybe they'll get TikTok famous eventually. That's really the only way it happens anymore for a band like this. In the meantime, I'll just enjoy tracking the growth of Anxious. Arturo, what say you about this record?
Yeah, famous on TikTok. Faint praise indeed. One of America's worst bands, and I mean the entire continent of North America, Mexico included, decides to torture the world with another album. Their previous album was unrelentingly thrashy, scream at the world, emo punk, childish vomit. This album, it's got more songs about romantic relationships, but it's still watered down, streamlined emo punk for mainstream corporate radio. They went from annoyingly sucking to sucking in the blandest, dullest way possible. Most of this accounts to nothing more than Jimmy Eat World without the hooks. And I'm not much of a Jimmy Eat World fan to begin with. Wow, what a juvenile piece of shit. This whole album can be heard on YouTube. Do you know how many views it's gotten as of this recording? 4,000, which is a pittance. How many comments does it have? 5.
Yeah. Ugh. Well, but to be fair, the leading tracks, Counting Sheep, has like 550,000 views or listens on Spotify, and
at
several
least you're
other
getting
songs
closer to
are
1,000.
300,000. Anytime you can get into the couple of hundred thousands as an indie band, you're doing pretty good in the streaming world. So to be fair, so they're not getting much traction on YouTube, but they are, and they do have a pretty good profile on Spotify, and they are doing well as far as their promotion and getting themselves out there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that there's a club circuit out there, for this kind of band and this kind
Yeah,
of
there
music.
is. And
So
their label Run for Cover is replete with young emo bands. So
yeah,
there is a scene that's involved with this along the Eastern Seaboard in New York and Philly, and
right.
like these kids are basically from suburban New York and on the Connecticut side. So there is a scene for this kind of thing. So yeah, like I said, I think it's just inherent to you and me that I'll always be bigger into the Rites of Spring, Texas is the Reason, Jimmy Eat World, Fallout Boy thing than you are.
I
Uh,
do like Rites of Spring. Rites of Spring were the innovators. Never
yeah,
blame the innovators for the imitators.
yeah. I suppose you have a good point there, but like I said, I'm a big Fallout Boy fan. You're not, and this probably falls into that same category of just sort of inherent disagreement.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I chose this record because I know I like it and I think it's pretty good. It's a 3.5 star record, 4 star record. Yeah, I wouldn't quite put it for 4 stars, but it's a strong 3.5 star record. And I just knew that you'd hate it. Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. What if? Big L counts as one of the great what ifs in the history of hip hop, as in, what if he had lived? He was unfortunately murdered in early 1999, but he was a huge talent for such a young kid. He was only 25 when he died, and his recorded output goes back to when he was 18, and he just a tremendous talent, just really inventive and really versatile. And it's a real shame that we never really got to see him just as he was about to break into the big time is when he perished. And so real shame, but he definitely deserves an exploration here in 2025, here 30 years later. I think that he's become a legend because of the impact that he did make, and really underrated, but still a legend among hip hop heads. Real hip hop heads know from Big L, right, Art?
Right. Yeah, it's the casual hip hop fans or casual music fans who aren't familiar with Big L, and everyone knows Jay-Z, but not many hip hop nerds know that Big L was a little better. He really was. And we'll get to that. All right. So, Big L's origin story. We're going to explain why, at least I think he was better than Sean Carter. Big L was born Lamont Coleman in 1974 in Harlem, New York City, the third of three children. When he was about 11 years old, one of his two older brothers took him to a Run DMC concert at New York's Beacon Theater. According to his brother, young Lamont was blown away, and his interest in hip hop was ignited. So instant was this interest sparked that by the age of 12, he was already buying records and doing freestyle rapping with others in his neighborhood. In 1990, at the age of 16, he was already writing lyrics and formed a trio called Three the Hard Way. One member left, and then they became a duo called Two Hard Motherfuckers. It was around this time that he had a great name.
That.
It was around this time that people in his neighborhood took to calling him Big L, a name that stuck and was soon taken by Coleman as his artist's name. That name was certainly getting around because he was getting around, regularly doing freestyle battles with whomever he could find. According to Big L himself, in the beginning, quote, "In the beginning, all I ever saw me doing was battling everybody on the street corners, rhyming in the hallways, beating on the wall, rhyming to my friends. Every now and then, a house party, grab the mic, a block party, grab the mic," end quote. After graduating high school in 1992 at the age of 18, he recorded several demos. That year, he appeared with Lord Finesse on an episode of Yo MTV Raps. Big L had met Lord Finesse 2 years earlier at a record store autograph signing session and impressed the older rapper with his freestyling. His first appearance on record came in a guest spot on Yes You May, the B-side to Lord Finesse's 1992 single Party Over Here. By this point, he was already part of Lord Finesse's Bronx-based hip-hop collective Diggin' in the Crates crew, DITC for short, which counted notable members such as DJ Premier, the main producer and DJ from Gang Starr, and Fat Joe. What appeared to be a big break for Big L came in 1993, when out of 2,000 contestants, he won an amateur freestyle rapping contest hosted by Nubian Productions. This, in addition to him submitting a 4-track cassette demo to Columbia Records, led to him signing with that label. Columbia released Big L's first single, Devil's Son, in late 1993. More than just the usual braggadocio associated with most rappers in their first outing, this braggadocio came with a dark, visceral, disturbing edge that was at the time associated with what was called horrorcore hip-hop. Horrorcore hip-hop is basically a subgenre whose lyrics are indebted to the graphic violence and themes portrayed in horror movies. This could include a variety of things: graphic and descriptive murder, insanity, mental illness, cannibalism, mutilation, suicide, torture, the occult, or having anything to do with the supernatural. While Big L's lyrics in Devil's Son are indeed graphic in how much he intends to mutilate his opponents, it's done in a very tongue-in-cheek style, and in fact eschews most of the tropes associated with horrorcore. Big L himself said that while he was an avid fan of horror films, he didn't really consider himself a horrorcore rapper in any way, and neither do I, really. What's more important is how unbelievably impressive Big L's rapping skills were right from the start. Here we had dazzling wordplay, an effortlessly smooth and inventive flow, endlessly inventive rhyme schemes, and remarkable timing in keeping himself in rhythm to the beat. A lot of rappers they've lost track of that art form. Big L had it in spades, in rhythm to the beat. The highly descriptive lyrics of the street's dark grittiness and evocative narratives would come later, but it was clear that underground hip-hop had found itself with a prodigy in its midst. Big L was really busy during this time. In this 1993 to 94 period, he formed another hip-hop collective called Children of the Corn, COC for short, that included a whole slew of Harlem rappers, including Killa Cam, later to become Cam'ron, Murder Mace, and producer Six Figga Digga. Lots of live shows in New York and the New York area filled up Big L's slate in 1994, both as a solo artist and as a part of an ensemble either with Children of the Corn or DITC. And his underground reputation started to solidify Big L as a name to watch. I mean, there was a reason he was a New York underground legend. He played and toured everywhere around New York. In late 1994, Columbia put out his second standalone single, Put It On, with Buck Wild producing one of the best beats in all of 90s hip hop, and Big L's staccato, viper quick, hyper rhythmic delivery stealing the show. Seriously, listen to this track in particular, and you can hear how Jay-Z practically stole his entire flow and rapping style from Big L, starting with Jigga's 1996 album Reasonable Doubt and onward. Speaking of Jay-Z, this brings us to the infamous rap battle between Big L and Jay-Z on Stretch and Bobbito's legendary New York City radio show. A little bit of context here. From 1990 through 96, Adrian Bartos, DJ Stretch Armstrong, and Robert Bobbito Garcia hosted a show on Thursdays from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. on 89.9 WKCR FM, a student radio station at Columbia University that functioned as an alternative to mainstream hip-hop by being devoted to all things related to underground hip-hop, playing music by underground artists, unsigned artists, B-sides of commercial artists, and inviting guests on the show for both freestyle battles and DJ scratch sessions. From 1996 to 97, the show moved to 97.1 WQHT-FM, Hot 97, at the time the most prominent commercial hip-hop station in the city, and at a more listener-friendly time slot. The show ended when Bartos, Stretch, expressed his disinterest and overall lack of enthusiasm for hip-hop by the end of the 1990s. Yet the roll call of artists that got their break, either having their music first played on the station or appearing at the station in person, is impressive. The notorious B.I.G., Eminem, Jay-Z, Nas, Big L, Big Pun, Fat Joe, the Wu-Tang Clan, the Fugees, Black Star, Common, Exhibit, Noriega. There's a terrific 2015 documentary called Stretch and Bobbito, Radio That Changed Lives, chronicling the story of their partnership that all of you should check out. Anyway, back to the battle. In 1995, both Jay-Z and Big L came into Stretch and Bobbito's studio for a friendly rap battle. While it may have been friendly, if one were to score this as a real competition, Big L smoked Jay-Z. Big L's flow was fluid yet tight, wildly inventive with his rhymes and lyrics, perfectly rhythmic and on time and in rhythm with the beat. On top of that, he mixed it up by changing the cadence of his flow from the first round of the battle to the second. Jay-Z, on the other hand, just sounded like he was talking fast, using cliche, predictable words for rhyming, saying nothing with his lyrics, and showing a propensity for awkward and odd pauses throughout his rap. You can find the full version of this battle on YouTube by typing Big L and Jay-Z freestyle and in parentheses full 10-minute version. Jigga would clean up his flow very soon, and that cleaned up flow would sound a lot like Big L's flow. And I'm pretty sure it's not just me who thinks that. So, before I go into the lone album to come out in Big L's lifetime, Chris, what say you about Big L's come-up story?
Big L, well, first off, from that Stretch and Bobbito freestyle, the best line from that is Big L saying, "I'm so ahead of my time, my parents haven't met yet." Just really, really good. Yeah, he was pretty incredible from the get-go. I mean, he just had a real talent for wordplay, and he was just one. There's very few guys. There's the Tupacs, there's the Biggies, and there's the folks like Raekwon's, or actually more like Ghostface. These guys that had a talent for riding the beat, no matter what beat you put in front of them. Yeah. And even if they weren't great beats, or even if they were derivative beats, or like the DITC guys, obviously they were they were beholden to DJ Premier and RZA in what they were doing. So they kind of let's just say they borrowed musical ideas, but Big L propped them up. And he was that kind of talent where it was not a producer's racket when Big L stepped in the booth. It was right. Big L riding the show, and it was pretty amazing. And that Jay-Z battle. The thing about it is, it's not really a battle. It's presented as kind of a friendly, kind of back and forth freestyle. Yeah. But it really does kind of become a battle because you can kind of hear it halfway through. where right before his second verse, Big L says, "I haven't done this in a while," and so it's like he's licking his chops.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, oh, I'm in this for the competition. But
Yeah.
to be fair to Jay-Z, he's actually quite good. He has two verses on that. The first verse is quite good, and then I think he got a little bit tripped up, and I don't know if it was because he realized that Big L was smoking him or whatever. But then he starts to get kind of goofy in the second verse and starts kind of stumbling and making stuff up and doing these really odd sort of almost like scatting
Yeah.
type of things. And so, Big L does wipe the floor with him. And so it's kind of ironic that Big L, had a head start on Jay-Z. I mean, like I said, Big L he was making music. Devil's Son is 1992.
No, well, the single came out in 93.
Yeah, the single came out in 93, but he wrote it in 92.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
the fact that he's 18 years old in 1992 doing horrorcore to the extent that he was, and like you said, it's not true horrorcore in the sense that it's not toned down so much as it's not as ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah.
he's keeping the kind of the fucked up violent nature of it, but cutting down on like the ghouls and goblins kind of shit
Yeah.
that you got from Gravediggers and some of the others. So yeah, Big L, he got off to a really great start, and he was pretty much unmatched at that point, and he also is a testament to the work ethic that nobody people talk about the glitz and the glamour of hip hop, but nobody talks about the work ethic. The
Yeah.
guys that make it and the guys that do well and the guys that are the best are the product of just flat out just work ethic. They're just working
Yeah.
their asses off. They're out there on the streets promoting themselves. They're out there taking any battle they can. They're taking any show they can. I mean, that's the story of the Wu-Tang Clan. That's the
Right.
story of, I mean, in some ways, that's the story of Jay-Z. He eventually like
Sure.
hustled his way to the top. And so Big L was one of the foremost hustlers in the history of hip hop. I mean, that guy just never stopped working, and he had a professionalism to him, and he had a drive to him that was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. All right. Now, let's talk about the album, the one album, full-length album that he put out in his lifetime. And that is 1995's Lifestyles with a Z of Da Poor and Dangerous.
Of
When
spelled
Colum-
OV.
OV, right, OV. When Columbia Records put out Lifestyles of Da Poor and Dangerous in early spring of 1995, I don't think they had an idea of how raw and visceral Big L's lyrics and rapping actually were. Despite his powerful underground reputation, as well as being a freestyle wizard, the album peaked at a disappointing number 149 in the Billboard album chart, and none of the singles off the album, despite several big budget videos being made, hit the top 10 of the Billboard rap singles chart. In my opinion, this album and Big L in general didn't latch on to a wider audience simply because, as I said before, it was all just too raw, too hardcore, too visceral, too
Too ahead of
spiky
its
and in
time.
your face, too ahead of its time. Despite a few concessions to mainstream hip hop of the time in a few of the tracks, this was a bare bone, dry production of no nonsense hip hop. And then there's L's rapping and lyrics themselves. One can be forgiven for being intimidated or scared at the graphic horrorcore aspects of his raps, namely what he's going to do to his supposed enemies. And then you have the narrative storytelling tracks with his descriptions and details so vivid, so ominous, so unrelentingly dark that they can be genuinely disturbing. Remember, this was 1995, the peak time for gangster rap, when hip hop this unvarnished, this hard, this heavy, and this unapologetic scared off the mainstream. You know this was more gangsta than gangsta.
Yeah, I was
Tupac
gonna
beat
say, and this was in the middle of the rise of gangster rap too.
Right. This was more gangsta than gangsta. Tupac be damned, and I love Tupac.
Yeah.
However, with 30 years of distance, you can listen to this album out of its cultural and historical context in which it was made, and clearly see the artistic brilliance and innovation, especially in this current time when the vast majority of the hip hop landscape is lacking true lyrical poets and truly skilled rappers. Put It On is, for sure, a classic hip hop braggadocio track, but L's impeccable flow, endlessly inventive rhyme schemes, and remarkable timing in regard, again, keeping himself in rhythm to the beat make it endlessly compelling. Known for his graphic, violent lyrics and stark depictions of stories of gritty street life, on the track Street Struck, Big L, well, here he gives us, or at least his community, a cautionary rap. In front of a smoky, woozy, slightly psychedelic beat, you get a sense of the real Lamont Coleman, bemoaning the loss of so many people, people who could have been athletes, artists, musicians, teachers, etc., to the criminal lifestyle, and by extension, prison and death. The streets do indeed call him by his name, but he does his best to stay home and write his songs, thankful that music gave him a way out. It's ironic, really, considering how he died. On No Ends, No Skins, the bopping beat and jazzy horn sample is something out of early 1990s A Tribe Called Quest. Always a good thing. And his lyrics move from a street life narrative to a romantic relationship cautionary message. Sure, his dismissive comments about women can come off as a bit misogynistic. After all, this is 1990s hip hop. But his point about being careful not to be taken advantage of by gold digging romantic partners, yes, folks, it can go both ways, remains valid. The album really is track after track of virtuoso rapping skills, of exquisite flow, inventive lyrics, and rhyme schemes that make poetry out of self-aggrandizement and haunting and harrowing urban stories of crime as survival. Probably a bit too much for its time, but if released in today's climate of watered down, bland, safe, mainstream hip hop, of candy ass rhymes and insipid lyrics, I'm confident that Lifestyles of Da Poor and Dangerous would be seen as refreshing, shockingly different, challenging, and for those young fans not too familiar with the past, revolutionary. It would make most contemporary artists not named Kendrick Lamar take a long look in the mirror and reevaluate themselves. It's much more than just a classic New York East Coast hip hop record. It's a masterpiece of skill, lyricism, minimalist production, and street narratives. Few artists in hip hop history were ever this real and this effective in projecting it. It is a definitive 5-star classic. Chris?
Yeah, I fall short of 5 stars, but this is a case of the performer transcending the totality of his product. That in terms of just this being a star vehicle for a superstar of Big L's caliber, then it's kind of like I feel the same way about this album that I do about a couple of Tupac's records. Where there's some musical limitations on this thing where there is some biting of Premier, there is some biting of Tribe Called Quest, there is some biting of RZA, and there's a couple of posse cuts on here that aren't particularly inspired, although The Graveyard is kind of funny. It's like a bunch of guys trying to do horrorcore, and guess what, Jay-Z is one of the rappers on the Graveyard. Go figure. Yeah. Big L is kind of lifting them up. But there's a versatility on this record that's pretty stunning. And from the research that you and I both did, it really comes down to his relationship with Columbia. That the heart of what he had been doing up until he got with Columbia was more in the line of All Black, which is by far the best. That's the best song that he ever did. That song is incredible as a battle rap, as a horrorcore rap, as a violent fantasy rap. That just has everything to it. Danger Zone is a close second to that. Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous, The Graveyard, and then the album closer, Let 'Em Have It, L, which is a great song. So you have that. So it's a lot of bass driven horrorcore type of shit. But then you have the other side of it, which it's no coincidence, by the way, that Put It On, MVP, and Ends and what's the name of the song? Ends and Skins.
Yeah.
Basically, it's no coincidence that those are the first three songs on the record because those are obviously the most commercial and
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and commercially
Sure.
sensitive tracks. And so this is one of those things where he's at the mercy of his A&R saying, "Hey man, you got to lighten up."
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, like if you listen, most of the record is pretty damn heavy, especially the street narratives. Pretty
yeah,
harrowing stuff.
yeah, very harrowing stuff. And then Street Struck and tired of the bullshit. Uh, Yeah, which is an anti-cop song. I think
Yeah.
those are put on there because they wanted to see more of a consciousness. They didn't want it just being just this psycho talking about ripping your heart out.
Yeah. Yeah.
They wanted something more mindful,
But
and
I don't think
and
it's
they
that.
got it.
I think Big L wanted that in there too. I don't.
Yeah,
Big L was a smart dude. He didn't want to be the horrorcore guy. You know.
and like I said, and he said that he could do horrorcore, but that wasn't his favorite style, and
Yeah.
so
Right.
he was a pro's pro. I mean, give
Yeah.
him a concept and say, we want you to go this direction or try this, and he could do it. He could wear those suits, and so he was pretty goddamn good. And the other thing about this record is it's a pretty good showcase for the DITC sound, and those
Yeah.
guys, that's an extremely underrated posse.
Their sound is very stark and very minimalist. Kind
Yeah,
of like
absolutely, very street.
kind of like a less fuzzier RZA.
Yeah,
You know.
it's a less fuzzy RZA, and Lord Finesse, Buck Wild, and Showbiz all have production credits on this record.
Right.
And Primo was involved with them, Fat Joe, Diamond D, and so it was mostly based in the Bronx, but they obviously Big L gave them that Harlem flavor. The one thing I will say about this record too, so there's the DITC touches which are good. But one thing that hasn't aged well is that he had a propensity for making age jokes, which
Mm.
back then had a shock value to him.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you remove them out of the context of the crisis of the day,
Yeah.
they seem pretty sophomoric.
I mean, the homophobia doesn't age well in this record. But then again, you can say the same thing about Eminem. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not even homophobia. It's just him talk. The age jokes are about him infecting as many honeys as possible on a
Jeez.
couple of the songs. It's like him spreading the AIDS virus and
Yeah.
him making light of his promiscuity. So it's just it's pretty tacky, and so that's the one mark really against it. But other than that, as a star vehicle for what he's doing, I mean, there's just some incredible lyricism on that. Like you said, Put It On is incredible. Again, I love All Black and Danger Zone. I think that that's really the heart of what Big L could do. And I love he's got a line. I think it's in Let Him Have It L, where he says, "I knocked out so many teeth, the tooth fairy went bankrupt."
That's a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he was a good punchline guy. He was full of punchlines, and the best MCs could all had punchlines. Even Tupac was a pretty good punchliner. He was more serious and more cerebral than most any rapper that ever lived. But he had his propensity for punchlines too, and so Big L was sort of in that category. And here's one last thought. You imagine if Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous had come out in like March of 1999 or June of 1999.
I wonder.
Then in terms of the context, that was following DMX and Eminem coming
Yeah.
into. So now the fucked up shit was becoming more acceptable,
Yeah. Yeah.
and was becoming and was getting more was getting more traction and was being more sought after. And was leading the charts. Like I said, DMX was selling records like crazy. Eminem was selling records like crazy. So I think if you put this record in the middle of that, and that time, I think it would have done a whole lot better.
Well, speaking of what came after, let's talk about after this album. What happened to Big L after? Why didn't it break through? What happened with his record label? And what did he do afterward? Chris, tell us.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the rest of Lamont Coleman's career and brief life. So, Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous was, as we've established, a promising debut spiked with some astonishing highlights and star turns. It was also something of a schizophrenic affair, which in interviews over the subsequent years, the rapper's collaborators put squarely on the discomfort of Columbia Records with the harder edges of Lamont Coleman's style. They didn't want a record solely spiked with the crazier, more vicious stuff like All Black and Danger Zone. So to appease the label, Big L and his producers offered up the anti-cop diatribe, fed up with the bullshit, and the popular lighter Put It On and other songs in an attempt to balance things out. It probably wasn't a surprise to Coleman, really, when in late 1996, Columbia, despite modestly successful sales of about 200,000 copies of Lifestyles, dropped him from the label. Being ahead of your time, it turns out, was hazardous to Big L's professional health.
Yeah.
Columbia ultimately wasn't in a position to appreciate what they had, too focused on the rising profiles of Nas, Notorious B.I.G., Jay-Z, and other New York rappers to see that they might have their own superstar eventually with a little more patience and better timing. Big L explained it in an interview with a British music magazine this way, quote, "They didn't promote me in the way I needed to be promoted. I'm a lyricist and they were trying to point me in a different direction to where I was heading. Also, a lot of people I originally was working with at Columbia had left, so I was there with a bunch of strangers that didn't really know my music. I didn't really get along with the new people, so I left." Yeah, or they left him.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like he said, she said. But anyway, without a major label deal in place, Big L then spent the next 2 years plus in hustler mode. He leaned on his long associations with DITC to keep an occasional profile on record while he hit the studio to record new tracks that would be used as part of an eventual second album. There were a couple of singles that the DITC guys put on, one called The Enemy that blew up in '97. And so that kind of kept him going. He also tried his hand at entrepreneurship, starting his own label called Flamboyant Entertainment in 1998. It was through Flamboyant that he released what would prove to be his breakthrough single, Ebonics Criminal Slang. The song was a smart, entertaining run through a whole slew of street vernacular, marked by L's tight, clean, economical flow. The single found its way into rotation on hip-hop radio and created an undeniable buzz in the New York underground. The source named Ebonics one of the best independent hip-hop singles of the year, of 1998, that is. Big L was officially back on the map heading into 1999, and efforts to release that second album stepped up. So too did the attention paid to Big L by the major labels. Big L actually began negotiations with, ironically enough, Jay-Z and Damon Dash's Rockefeller Records for him and his associates of his from Harlem to join the label as a group known as the Wolfpack. They really wanted him, but Big L was trying to bring his buddies along with him. Right. But alas, Big L's well-deserved megastar turn in the bigs never came to pass. Coleman was murdered in a drive-by shooting on 139th Street in Harlem on February 15th, 1999. He was shot a total of 9 times during the attack. Police made an arrest a few months later, but the charges could not stick because of a lack of evidence. The crime remains unsolved and the case remains cold to this day. Rumors have circulated for years that the murder was retaliation for an attempt by Big L's brother, Big Lee, and Big L himself to hire a hitman to kill the alleged perpetrator. No matter the source of the beef or what prompted someone to gun Lamont Coleman down in cold blood, the incident was undoubtedly tragic and created a tremendous loss for hip-hop and the genre's future. I have no absolute doubt that Big L would have been a big star by early in 2000 at the latest had he lived. Neither do you, right, Arturo?
No, I think he would have been really big. Two things about Ebonics. What I love about that song is that it works on 2 levels. On one level, it's kind of like a lesson for people who are not black or from the inner city about language. It's a slang language lesson, which is really, and it's done in a really amusing, catchy, hooky, and lighthearted way. Something like Big L is not known for, is lightheartedness, you know. Yep. And it works in another sense. in a deeper way, it's that song is like him embracing his African American heritage.
Yep.
It really is, and this is which is really poignant at a time, the late 1990s, when you were starting to see a right-wing conservative pushback against political correctness and any
Yeah.
kind of like ethnic identifying, anything that wasn't white, really.
Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, he signed to Jay-Z's Rockefeller. I just wonder how much of Jay-Z's apple he would have bitten had he not died. Like how much of
Yeah.
Jay-Z's star would he have taken for himself?
But that
Because
might not have been a bad thing at that point because
to me, he's an undeniably better rapper than Jay-Z. I
yeah,
mean,
no,
as
yeah,
good as Jay-Z could be, Big L was better,
he
dude. He
definitely
was
was.
way
But
better.
you have to remember between that freestyle appearance in 1995 on Stretch and Bobbito, and by the time of early 1999, Jay-Z in late 1998 had released in my the Hard Knock Life record.
Yeah.
Jay-Z had improved a lot, and
He had improved. He had improved, but
Jay-Z had a knack.
he had
He,
improved, but it was modeled on Big L's style. It was a slightly watered down Big L,
it's some ways, but it played. I mean, he had a real
Sure,
sense for
sure.
how to create a hot song.
Right,
And
right.
not that Big L didn't, but I
Yeah,
almost wonder if, like you said, that he might have, he might have bitten Jay-Z's apple a little bit and gone that way. But at the same time, Jay-Z, had figured out a commercial formula, or
right.
had achieved enough success. I think that the two of them could have partnered really, really well. And I think that Big L could have learned from Jay-Z's success on getting on the radio,
Yeah,
and that Big
maybe.
L could have given Jay-Z the rub as to having, like the most talented rapper in New York is on Jay-Z's label. So they would have helped each other out. That
Right.
Big L would have learned Jay-Z's business lessons, and
Yeah.
Jay-Z would have had his shiny new toy on his record
Yeah.
label.
And
He,
Jay-Z would
he
have a little bit more street cred.
yeah, he didn't actually sign with Rockefeller. He was in the middle of negotiating.
Oh, he was negotiating. I thought he actually
No,
signed.
he didn't actually sign. He was in the middle of negotiating and would have been signed probably by the spring,
Yeah.
had he not died.
Yeah.
And so there's a chances are he would have been signed by the end or by like April or May of 1999, and then an album by the Wolf Pack or Big L and the Wolf Pack or something like that would have come out by that fall.
Right.
And some of the stuff that we're going to talk about next would have been on that
Sure.
record, but a lot
Right.
better stuff would have been on that. It would have been okay. Now here's my chance at the bigs, and I could just
Yeah.
imagine how good that record would have been,
Right.
had it come out.
Yeah.
So
Well, what we do have in 2000, there's a posthumous record called The Big Picture that basically is the stuff that Big L had recorded that probably would have been on his Rockefeller Records debut. Chris?
yeah, at the time Big L was murdered, he had been recording songs and laying down vocal tracks for what he hoped would be his long-awaited follow-up, or his next album, a long-awaited follow-up to Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. But his death left his business partners and associates with something unfinished and unpolished. Much like with other rappers, though, they made sure that Big L would receive the posthumous tribute treatment, which resulted in the release of Big L's quote-unquote second album, The Big Picture, in August of 2000. The Big Picture mixes songs that L had completed prior to his death with reworkings and virtually whole new creations completed by some all-world names. That roster of post-dead collaborators included the producers DJ Premier and Pete Rock, and rappers such as Big Daddy Kane, Guru, Cool G Rap, Fat Joe, and in a bit of an eye roller, that other famous dead guy, Two Shot Tupac Shakur. The result is an uneven affair that in spots gives Big L the short shrift, but in others shows the world what the world would miss out on. Ebonics does make the cut here. So do what likely would have been three additional singles on a proper Big L album. Holding It Down, which features a breezy beat and some serious braggadocio from Big L. Quote, I got more dimes than that Sprint lady. He says in one amusing instance. There's a song Flamboyant, which was meant as an anthem for his label, but nevertheless was a platform for Big L's lyrical dexterity and violent edge. And then Who You Sliding With, a funky and humorous ode to hooking up at a club. There are also two startlingly graphic story songs, which go much farther in terms of the details and the narrative and the storytelling than anything he had ever done. And each of these depicts a robbery and murder that Big L's protagonists find themselves willingly involved in. One of these is called The Heist, which is him and a couple of his boys following and tailing his wife and some dude and a couple of partying with a couple of other people and busting in and killing them all and stealing a couple of $1 million. And then there's another song called Casualties of a Dice Game, which is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a dice game going horribly, horribly wrong. But all of this showed that Big L really had a talent for spinning these types of narratives, which take his horrorcore leanings and graduate them to pure cinematic crime drama. And then there's the amazing 98 freestyle, which shows what L was capable of when you let him loose on the mic with just whatever came into his head. Those are the strong points. The best of the obviously remixed and amended tracks is Games, featuring new verses from Guru and Sadat X, who helped finish Big L's story about pursuing exactly the wrong woman after his show. The rest of this part of the album is wholly disappointing, though, and at the worst instances, Big L's verses feel tacked on to fare that has nothing to do with him otherwise. This is his B-list stuff that probably would have never seen the light of day if he was in a formal, super selective album-making process. That's a shame, because at those times, folks forget who the star is supposed to be. But those misfires ultimately don't eject Big L from his own stage. At his best, he was positively electric, which the big picture, despite its inconsistencies and unfortunate origin story, still manages to display enough of to make the album a worthy release. And showing just how much of a profile he was regaining by the time of his murder and in its immediate aftermath, the album debuted at number 13 on the Billboard 200 albums chart and went gold. Yeah, plus Flamboyant.
If I were Big L behind the grave, beyond the grave, I'd be pissed off. Like, motherfucker, now you're listening to me?
Yep. And then plus Flamboyant, the song Flamboyant actually went to the top of the hip hop charts. It was number one on Billboard's main hip hop chart for a little while. So he did have a little bit of chart success, and that album went gold. And so he did have a little bit of success from the grave. And like you said, maybe he would have been a little bit pissed. Like he said, that guy worked his ass off to get his audience. Yeah. And just as he was about to get it, boom, death
popped
up in Harlem. It's really a fucking shame.
Yeah, I actually like this album a little more, or this compilation really is what it is. I like a little more than you do. I think the completely finished tracks are great. That's what Big L intended. Those are the songs that Big L wanted to do. The pieced together tracks and the remix stuff, I think some of it works really well. There are a lot of producers in here. You can say there are a few too many cooks in the kitchen, but I think most of the cooks do a good job. I think you hear Big L's spirit, 1 foot in the hardcore style, that hardcore minimalist beats, just riveting, violent, but the highly descriptive street life lyrics. And he's starting to get, and you can hear some of them getting a little bit more lighthearted, so he can go down easy for more commercial acceptance, like the guy who ran the label that almost signed him, Jay-Z. Yep. So I think the big picture shows what I think this album shows what the next Big L album would have actually sounded like, a little bit more than you think.
Yeah, maybe probably but half and half. I mean, the half of it that was finished, plus another half of him taking it to the finish line would have been an astonishing record. But I just think that there's just a little too much crap that was put together to fill it out. I mean, obviously the Tupac thing is just exploitive.
Yeah, Tupac thing's ridiculous. Yeah, that's yeah.
And the Big Daddy Kane thing is kind of silly too. I mean, that's DJ Premier, and he was a Big Daddy Kane fan, so that was like Kane's way of honoring Big L in it. But it's kind of silly, and it falls flat.
On this episode, we broke down the brief career of Big L, hip-hop's lost genius. In the next episode, we are time traveling back to the year 1980 for the final episode of our third Golden Age of Rock series. It really is the end of an era for the music industry, as the following year would see the launch of MTV and a complete landscape-altering change in how music would be consumed and thought of. But 1980 still managed to give us some all-time great and influential music. New wave rock reached its artistic peak with Talking Heads releasing an all-time classic of African and Latin-influenced avant funk. The Clash further pushed the parameters of what it meant to be punk rock with a stylistically hyper-eclectic triple album. Post-punk and goth pioneers Joy Division came to an end with the suicide of singer Ian Curtis, but the masterpiece album and single they released that year would resonate for decades to come. It was a banner year for hard rock and heavy metal as AC/DC, Motorhead, and Rush released seminal albums, and Prince unveiled what the sound of R&B in the 1980s would be with the indelible Dirty Mind. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you the final and 1980 edition of our third Golden Age of Rock series. So Chris, Big L, what's the legacy?
I would say the legacy of Big L was that he was one of the hardest working men in the hip hop show business of the early 90s. And he showed what was really capable, what was possible for hip hop as an art form in terms of its lyrical content and the sort of the styles that you could really embrace. That you could go how hard is hard, how light is light, how heavy is heavy, how emotional is emotional, how evocative is evocative. And I think that Big L took those, all of that to their extremes and just had a real talent. And, not only as a lyricist, but as a rapper, his ability to ride a beat is one of the best of all time. He's right there with Tupac, with Biggie, with Eminem, with Jay-Z, and some of those guys there. He was right there on their level, and
don't forget Q-Tip. Q-Tip was brilliant at that too.
Yeah, Q-Tip was brilliant at that too. But I, in some ways, I think he surpasses most of them with his ability to do that. And the guy could write a hook too. I mean, all you have to do is listen to MVP and put it on, and also Ebonics, and that he just had a hook writing ability. That he had a hit maker sensibility. Even when he went to the horrorcore stuff, like even All Black, has a hell of a hook. And so he just was electric, and he was electric. He was dynamic, and he deserved to be a star. I don't know who was working at Columbia at the time, but they screwed up.
Yeah, they did.
And they didn't. It's not that they didn't know what they had; they just didn't appreciate what they had, or they weren't ready for it. They thought that that it was too raw for what they were used to. And the fact that he even got a major label, he got his deal with Columbia off a 4-track cassette,
right?
That he put together with Lord Finesse and handed over to an A&R man there, and that's how he got his deal. And so, they knew they had something, but they didn't appreciate what they had. Yeah. And so his legacy is probably the most under tapped superstar rapper of that era and pretty much of all time. He didn't get a chance to be the star that he was, or to enjoy the limelight and to enjoy the success, the fruits of his labor. The labor is there. The labor is there in spades, but he never got a chance to enjoy the labor. So that's his legacy. He's like one of the great untapped superstars in the history of hip hop and even really popular music of the last 30 years.
Yeah, to me, for me, I go a little further than you. I think he's one of the single greatest rappers and lyricists who ever lived of all time. I think he's an all-time great.
Yeah, I do too.
I think, and like you, I do think he's probably the most untapped potential talent in the history of the genre. And I think way more highly of Lifestyles of Da Poor and Dangerous than you do. I think it's one of the 50 greatest hip hop albums ever made. I think even the tracks that kind of ape other producers, the stuff that ape RZA, the productions that ape DJ Premier, and DJ Premier himself produces on that record.
No, he doesn't.
I'm pretty sure he has a track or two on it.
No, not on Lifestyles of Poor and Dangerous. He doesn't. He has like 3 or 4 tracks in the big picture, but he didn't do anything on. It's all DITC guys. It's all Showbiz and Buck Wild and Lord Finesse.
Well, anyway, but the stuff that is quote unquote biting from other producers sounds like really good reproductions of those producers. It's straight up. It really is good. It really is great all around. And I mean, there's only 1 or 2, I think there's only 1 not so great track on it. So I think it just hits on everything lyrically. I mean, yeah, you may say that some of the songs that were tacked on, Put It On, MVP, No Ends, No Skins, those are the commercial tracks. But I think it adds to the diversity and the versality and the breadth.
Oh, absolutely.
Of Big L's talent.
They don't detract from it. I mean, like I said, the story is that they're there because of Columbia's request for balance. But
it works. It works as a balance.
It works, and it adds to the record.
It smooths the listener in. And then when you get into the hard stuff like Danger Zone, Enough Is Enough, Let 'Em Have It, L, shit like that. So yeah, and so it's a fantastic. I think it's one of the greatest records of all time. To me, of course, I'm not a Jay-Z fan, so I'm going to say it's better than anything Jay-Z's ever done. Ha ha ha. But
not quite.
But yeah, but I really do think so, and I really do think. I stick with what I said before. If you put Big L circa 1995 in a time machine and bring him 30 years later to 2025, the hip hop world will be going, what the fuck?
Yep.
Because there's nothing in hip hop right now that like sounds like this. Like the only person in mainstream hip hop who can measure up to this currently contemporary mainstream hip hop is Kendrick Lamar, and that's
Lamar, yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. But even like Forklift, the Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous, like I said before, to 1999 or 2000. Yeah. And it probably would have been a hit by then. Yeah. Because again, people I think were more ready for it at that point. And so Big L was really about 5 years ahead of his time as far as being kind of a purveyor of truly fucked up shit.
Yeah. Pretty true.
yeah. And so yeah, that's the thing. So more power to Big L, R.I.P. One of the best rappers of his era, one of the best rappers of all time, and a guy who deserves a much bigger profile than he has. And so yours truly, Curmudgeons, are definitely honored to dedicate an episode, to him and his memory. And I think that we're doing a good public service here, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us to the end, folks. We are done with this episode. Shorter than usual, but that's okay. Better for consumption. And in 2 weeks, we're going to bring you the final episode of our third Golden Age of Rock series, the 1980 episode, just before MTV changes the landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before MTV changes the landscape. And you will be sure to give you plenty of flavor from that episode and give you some really strong teasers when you go and join our Curmudgeonly community on Facebook at facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. We put up some good stuff there. There's been good interaction there lately. Like I said, last month we got our first crowdsourced idea. So it's a pretty vibrant thing that we have going up there. So please join us there. And it's invite only. And we actually just invited somebody out of the blue this week. I think it was another podcast called Rock We Love. So welcome to the community there, folks. And so other than that, if you are also a fan of Big L, or you don't think Big L was all that, or you think he was whack, which would make you whack, by the way. But if you feel that way, give us some fan mail. Hit us up at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And as we always do in these episodes, we'll be putting together a special Spotify playlist that will accompany this episode.
The playlist is basically the entire Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous album.
And a big picture.
Yeah, yep. And a big picture. Yeah.
And a bunch of singles that he was involved in. So we'll have some of that there as well. So anyway, you'll be able to access that playlist through a link in the episode description wherever you're getting this podcast, whether that's Apple, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. So look out for that and enjoy Big L to the hilt. Big L represent, yo.